Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever we may find you in the world. We graciously send greetings to you, and we are glad you are with us. Certainly, you could have been anywhere in the world, and literally you're anywhere in the world and from all over the world, in different places and spaces. And we thank you for being here. My name is the Reverend Vernon K. Walker, and I have the privilege of being the Senior Program Manager at the Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. And we are in an exciting week this week. We are in our Climate Prep Week. And later on, we'll show a slide thanking our many, many partners. But this is our 4th annual Climate Prep Week. And it is a week designed to understanding and awareness about how serious extreme weather is, as September is National Preparedness Month. So we thought it would be very fitting to have Preparedness Week at the end of September. Well, we are joined by many, many outstanding guests that are doing tremendous work in their own unique, special ways. And I'm elephant happy and peacock proud that they are here tonight, that they have taken some time out of their schedules to be here. They're busy, busy schedules. So thank you all. And I am going to ask that each and every one of you take a minute to introduce yourselves. You can say your name, your pronouns, your organization, and what is your work in that organization. And I will graciously start off with Shavel'le, and then you can pass it on. Shavel'le
Olivier, you're good, Vernon. Hey everyone, my name is Shavel'le Olivier. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition. MFFC is a health and wellness organization based in Mattapan, and our main priority is making sure that community members or community residents are in the forefront of everything we do by giving them the tools and education needed to make those changes, but also providing free and fun activities for residents to participate in so they can live healthy and active lifestyles. And we do this through our 5 focus areas of food access and nutrition, physical activity, youth development, environment, and community empowerment. And I will pass it off to Sara.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Reverend Vernon and Climate Crew for organizing us and all of your incredible work. And I'm just really so excited to be here and learn from my incredible co-panelists. My name is Sara Arman. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the Health Equity Coordinator at GreenRoots. GreenRoots is an environmental justice and resident-led community-based organization in Chelsea and East Boston. And at GreenRoots, I work on identifying the connections between health and environmental justice through connecting residents to resources and intensive community outreach. And I will pass it to Priya.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Priya Gandbhir. I am a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation, and I use she, her pronouns. Conservation Law Foundation is a member-supported environmental advocacy organization. So we use the law, markets, policy, etc., to advocate for New England's natural resources, as well as our communities. We have a program, the Clean Energy and Climate Change Program, which I work in, as well as several other programs. And I will pass to Caren. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's really nice to be here. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a physician at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. I also work as an editor at a medical journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. And at both of those, I've been doing a lot of work around education with respect to climate change and health. I'm also with Jim, who I will introduce next, a member of a physician group called Climate Code Blue. And we're really committed to taking action on climate, and particularly to trying to amplify voices of communities that are disproportionately affected. And I am going to turn it to Jim Recht.
Thank you, Caren. That's me, Jimrecht. I'm a physician as well, a psychiatrist, and I work at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. Caren already mentioned our mission as members of Climate Code Blue to amplify the voices of underserved and silenced communities. And we're doing this to fight the fossil fuel industry, to fight against the exploitation of land and water. And we're really honored to be with you guys tonight. Thanks.
Hey everyone, my name is.
Oh, sorry, Danilo. Yeah, I was supposed to pass it to you.
Yeah, that's okay. My name is Danilo Morales. I work with Codeman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation in Dorchester. My pronouns are he, his, him. Codeman Square missions as to build affordable housing for residents and small businesses. And also we focus on economic development and organizing. I work in the Eco-Innovations Department. I am the Environmental Justice Coordinator, Environmental Justice Specialist. And most of my work is focused on energy equity, energy justice. And I also work with green infrastructure and climate justice, environmental justice, policy, advocacy. And I am very excited to be here. I live in Jamaica Plain. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. And we appreciate that. We want to thank also our partners in general, such as and we'll share it, such as the Mass Library Association. These are some of our partners that has partnered with us for Climate Prep Week, as this is a week of events that are happening. And you can see our website, climatecrew.org, to see the events that are happening tomorrow and the following day. But certainly these are some of our many, many partners, the Massachusetts Library Association, Blue Marble Librarians, and many, many, many others. So we want to thank you for hosting events. And this week, we have over 70 events being hosted. So we appreciate each and every host that's hosting different events. So I'm going to start off. So I have the pleasure of being the moderator today. And we're not going to pull anybody's coattails because we know that people will respond in decency and order. So I'm going to start off with this question. So Jim and Caren, could you tell us as doctors, what are doctors and other healthcare providers seeing in their practices with patients who are suffering from climate-related illness? And you can go in whatever order you like.
Okay, so I'll start off. So thanks, Vernon. It's a great question. It's a really important issue. So we're seeing a range of problems. And before I get into them, I just want to kind of go back and remind people, as Jim already alluded to, that the main cause of climate change is burning fossil fuels. So this is causing climate change. It's also causing air pollution, and both of those are causing a lot of health problems. So just starting with extreme heat, because that's a biggie. And I know, any of you, going outside lately are well aware that we're having more days of extreme heat and heat waves. And that is resulting in, first of all, in more acute heat-related illnesses. The most serious of those being heat stroke, where people just can't cool down. Their temperature can go up to 105 degrees or more, and it is life-threatening, without emergency attention. But beyond that, having hotter days is actually associated with a lot of additional problems. Okay, so effects on the heart, more heart attacks, the cerebrovascular system with more strokes, more respiratory problems, mental health problems, which Jim will actually talk about, and pregnancy problems, where women are more prone to preterm birth or having small babies. And beyond these, we're seeing problems that aren't specifically heat related, but relate in part to higher temperatures. So just in our practices, We're seeing a lot of allergies. So those of you who are out there and think your allergies are worse, they are. Okay, and we know that climate change is putting more pollen into the air and it's lengthening the pollen season. And with that, we're seeing more patients with asthma flares. That's partly from the pollen. It's also from effects of air pollution. We know when it's hotter, there's more ground level ozone, which exacerbates breathing and cardiovascular problems that come with pollution. So these are big problems. And an additional point I want to make is with heat in particular, as many of you may know, the problem is greater in cities because of what is known as an urban heat island effect. And because there are lots of buildings and cars and black asphalt, and there often aren't a lot of trees. And we can get back to why that is. I mean, a lot of this relates to sort of racist redlining policies from the 1930s, but we know that people living in cities and often people of color are just exposed to greater temperatures when it's hot. Temperature doesn't go down at night, and that sets people up for more illness. So those are just a few. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Jim with the hope we can come back and talk about some things we can do about that.
Great, thank you, Caren. And yes, I'd love to come back to the fact that there are human causes for these medical problems and the suffering that's caused by climate change. And so there are also, human solutions for it. So we'll come back to that. In regard to mental illness, there are a couple different ways that extreme weather events harm our mental health. One of the most profound is the effect of extreme heat on sleep. Quality of sleep, we all know this through personal experience, but in terms of psychiatric illness, disrupted sleep is the primary cause of increases in anxiety, depression, and more serious illnesses like manic depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. And extreme heat, high levels of heat, heat waves, many days in a row with average nighttime temperatures elevated is the enemy of sleep. What we tend to see as psychiatrists and social workers in community health clinics is that as these heat waves become more frequent and more severe, more of the people that we serve are calling in with mental health emergencies, with exhaustion, increases in anxiety because of their fatigue, and increased frequency of emergency room visits and psychiatric hospitalizations. So number one is one of the number one harms is the disruption of sleep. And we have additional evidence that, as Caren noted, it's not just the heat, but the pollution that's caused by the burning of fossil fuels that is disrupting natural emotional rhythms and biorhythms, and also worsening mental health outcomes. In fact, there's a recent study that followed patients in oh, sorry about that. That's my own warning timer telling me my time is up. So I'll just wrap up by saying there's recent research showing that higher levels of particulate air pollution, the type of air pollution that's caused by car exhaust and other forms of fossil fuel burning, leads to higher incidence of severe mental illness and a higher incidence of psychiatric hospitalization. So what can we do about this? Caren?
Well, and then we're going to want to include the whole panel in what we can do about this. But I just want to mention, the key thing is going to be, and I think we're going to talk much about that during the rest of this session, how do we get at transitioning rapidly and justly to renewable energy? But just from a quick, protect your health standpoint, I just want to mention to the audience that it's just really important, and particularly for people who are older, have underlying health problems, or very, very young kids. It's really important to sort of be paying attention to how hot it is outside, what's the air quality index, how much pollen is in the air. And you can get all those on, apps and your news, et cetera, because you really want to minimize those exposures, when you're vulnerable, and you want to make sure when it's real hot that you have a cool place that you can go. And finally, we actually know from analyses that have looked at health outcomes related to heat waves that the biggest predictor of bad outcomes, of people dying, is being alone and having no one to check on you and make sure you're okay. So I think just that sort of having a community and looking out for each other can be really, really importantly protective for health.
Thanks for emphasizing that. Yes, in the acute, in the event itself, during an extreme event, especially heat waves, water is the most important and a cool, safe place. But like Caren is saying, for mental health outcomes too, community, it's scientifically proven to enhance survival in after extreme weather events.
Thank you for sharing that. And that has me curious about, we have so many tremendous groups here. Perhaps other groups could tell us what they're seeing and what climate impacts that they are seeing in their community. Maybe we could start with GreenRoots, then we could start with Sara, then we could go over to Shavel'le, then Danilo, and then we can have Priya go and share with us and enlighten and educate us on what you're seeing in your community related to health impact.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Caren and Jim, for sharing those health impacts of climate change. I was just like nodding along as you were saying everything, because I was like, this is exactly what we are seeing in the community. So in Chelsea in particular, we are seeing really high rates of all chronic illnesses. Chelsea actually has the highest asthma hospitalization rates in the state of Massachusetts. And so that's something that's like directly connected to air quality, both poor outdoor air quality that comes from the cars and trucks, as you were saying, but it also comes from the poor indoor air quality that's associated with having older housing stock. So I think we can think about that data a little bit, but it's also important to hear about the stories we're hearing from residents and our people and our community members. And I'm also a Chelsea resident. I have lived almost my whole life in Chelsea, so I can also share a little bit from my experience too, and what I'm hearing from my neighbors and friends and family and coworkers. Folks are really carrying this burden really immensely, and like living with prescriptions for pumps and inhalers. And in the chat, I'm actually going to share an article from the Boston Globe that features longtime GreenRoots member Nettis Amaya. Okay, so I just put it in the chat. And she talks about her experience having to rush her 4-year-old grandson to the emergency room after the extreme heat this summer triggered his asthma flare-up. And so folks are really telling their children, do not run around while it's hot outside to prevent these types of asthma attacks. People are worried about the health of their elderly parents who have multiple chronic illnesses. And so this is really the unfortunate and like very sad reality of Chelsea and East Boston residents. And we know that climate change is not something that's coming. It is here now, and it is hitting like our people, low income communities of color first and hardest.
Thank you, Sara, for sharing that. I'm going to offer a different perspective, or maybe it's the same. So with Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, we host a farmers market, the Mattapan Square Farmers Market. So we work with a lot of farmers and vendors to help sell their produce so they can sustain themselves economically throughout the summer. And what we've been hearing from our farmers is that there's not a lot of crop growing. So they're not yielding the harvest or the amount of harvest that they would compared to last year or the year before, because it's more harder, because it's more rainier. For example, we had a farmer, he only came for 2 weeks, and he said that he couldn't come anymore because of the yield of his corn. He didn't yield that much corn. And so we have to be aware that, when residents come into the market and they're like, hey, how come you don't have this? How come you don't have that? It's because the farmers weren't able to harvest what they were able to harvest because of climate change. So I'll offer that perspective.
Thank you. I think that all the topics that you're talking, all of you are very familiar. I think that for our neighborhoods or the places where we work. I want to just share two issues that I have found in my work. The first one I would say that is loneliness and social isolation that maybe Caren was mentioning something before already. I say that because we got a grant from Bar Foundation, is a COVID heat grant. So we bought AC air conditioners and we identify, with some help from community leaders, we identify people with like a seniors, pregnant women, or families with children, or any respiratory illnesses. And some of these people didn't show up. So I had a list, and I was waiting for these people to come to get the air conditioners. But it was like more than 3 weeks that I was having this, my waiting list, all these people that I had in the list, and they didn't show up. And I was wondering, and like, what happened? Why they are not coming? Like 3 weeks in July and August, it was really hot. So after that, I realized that some people, some seniors and people with disabilities, they rely, or they have very few connections, and they rely only in few people. So it was 2 people came to pick up the air conditioners for one of them, he picked up for 5 air conditioners for seniors, and the other person pick up like a 7 for like a mix of seniors and people with disabilities. So they are suffering this kind of demographies. They have like a low number of social connections or interactions, and they are depending on very few people to receive any kind of help in terms of like air conditioners in this case, but also food or any other emergency that may have. So that is happening. And then the second thing that I wanted to share is also gentrification. I would say that there are people that before the pandemic, they used to live in some places or some businesses, small businesses that they have closed and they are not there anymore. So they are, I don't know where they are. I don't know where they move because of the pandemic. So I was not kind of talking to them or no following with them. So, but now they are gone. I don't know what happened, but there are other people coming. So other people leaving, and other people are talking about leaving because they cannot pay the rent. They don't have a job. They have lost their jobs all with the pandemic. So they are gone. So this is kind of tough that they are having a tough time.
Danilo, do you get the sense that COVID has worsened the social the isolation, particularly for elderly, and I'm guessing maybe too for single parents?
I would say yes. I think that in the beginning we didn't understand the virus. We didn't understand the COVID, how it moved or how fast. So I think that that was in the beginning. That was one reason. But now we understand better. But people are still afraid of variants, so I think that they kind of want to take care of their own families and don't kind of risk going out to help other people. But yes, COVID totally has, like accelerated, or I can see more people struggling. Yeah, it's totally connected with that.
And even on the most kind of practical level, cooling centers, for example, much more difficult to manage, in some cases impossible during COVID because of the need for distancing and concerns about air exchange.
And Priya, yes, maybe perhaps you could share with us. You could share with us what have you been seeing in the communities?
Sure. So at Conservation Law Foundation, we work throughout New England. So some of my fellow panelists are, more on the ground than I am, but I would definitely reiterate what they've noted. New England is particularly susceptible to climate change. And in Massachusetts, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change on our communities. So from like a physical sense, this includes coastal flooding, more frequent and severe storms, hotter summers, more frequent heat waves. And, you know, as my fellow panelists have outlined, this impacts our public health. It impacts our physical bodies, our minds, our food systems, our economy. It also, you know, as some folks have noted, it impacts the most vulnerable communities the hardest. So race, age, disability, income, language, all of these can indicate how severely a community or a person will be impacted by climate change. And we are working to, you know, try to ensure that these communities are protected. One thing that I would add to some of what my fellow panelists have said is, you know, this is a compounding issue, right? So as we continue to rely on fossil fuels, and we will get more into this later on, but just an intro, as we continue to rely on fossil fuels and the global temperature continues to rise, we rely more heavily on our energy infrastructure. We're running our air conditioning more often, and in turn, you know, we're putting more dirty energy into the, or dirty, we're using dirty fuels and putting more pollution into the air, putting more greenhouse gases into the air. So it continues to compound. If you've seen in other cities and states where they have rolling blackouts because of high heat days and really high energy uses, you know, that's a very real possibility here as well if we don't address our energy infrastructure and work to make sure that it is able to handle, you know, what we foresee coming and what we're working to prevent, and you know, hoping to protect our vulnerable communities against.
Yes, and you're so, you know, I certainly do agree, and that's a little bit of what we've been doing at Crew, and also distributing AC units in the summer and heat cooling kits, and also in the winter distributing winter kits to help people prepare for flooding, because particularly people that are in areas that extensively flood, because we know that we are going to see an increased amount of hotter days. We know we're in the summer in New England, we know that we're going to see more stormwater flooding. A UN report that came out last year said that we're going to continue to see sea rise. We're going to continue to see sea levels rise at least to 2050 if we don't slow things down. So we know that the rain is descending, the floods are coming, and the winds are blowing. And it is important to be prepared so one doesn't get caught off guard. Speaking of which, I have a question for Sara, Shavel'le, and Danilo, and perhaps Shavel'le could start. What are your groups doing in your communities to engage residents around climate change? So perhaps Shavel'le can start us off, and Sara can share with us, and then Danilo can share some more information with us.
Yeah, so at Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, we're doing a lot, and a lot of these things intersect between all of the focus areas that I mentioned before. So in our physical activity, community empowerment piece, we focus on biking and walking as a form of transportation, and educating residents on transportation and the intersection of that and climate change. We've also been doing some complete street pop-ups. So complete streets is how can we make the streets available and usable for those who walk, those who bike, those who have a cane, those who use a wheelchair, all users besides cars, and teaching individuals the terminology that transportation planners would use. So when they go into community meetings hosted by the Boston Transportation Department, they will be able to advocate for a way that they want to see their community. Sharing stories like the one I said before about our farmers. climate change is affecting our food supplies and our food system. And so some things we do is we support a neighborhood association with the building of their food forests so community members can plant things that are edible and then go and eat them. We also support 2 community gardens. And this is very important because we want to make sure when people are growing their own food, that means that there's less processing of food. As we know, most of our food is processed, so the meat that we eat, anything that goes from the farmer over to a warehouse to get processed, and that releases a lot of chemicals in the air. And I read somewhere in the New York Times that meat and dairy account for 14% of the world's greenhouse gases, and that's contributing to the way that our world is changing and climate change. And then lastly, the things that we do is we partner with organizations in this space because we're a small organization. So we did some work with Chelsea GreenRoots and the Eco team in Northeastern, in our team learning about environmental changes and things like that. And we've partnered with CLF through the Healthy Neighborhood Study. We have a group of resident researchers from Mattapan going out and getting information and surveying community residents about how they feel about the Mattapan community.
Oh, thank you so much. I can jump in now. So I mentioned that GreenRoots is member-led, and so each month we host a monthly members meeting, and we use that time to discuss different environmental justice issues, as well as engage with researchers or local government or developers. And we also use that time to discuss any EJ legislation. At one of our members meeting, we worked with a firm to help give ideas of a redesign of a local park in Chelsea. This upcoming Friday, we're hosting a different event that's like a reimagining of this parcel of land that just sits on this really hot block. That is exactly basically what Caren was describing earlier, with like black asphalt and concrete buildings. So we use that time to invite community members to come out and share anything that they would want to see in that area, whether that's like more trees or a playground, or just trying to identify what residents in that area might need or want. We also try to facilitate more equitable access to the waterfront in Chelsea and East Boston, and we do that through different kayaking events or movie nights, just trying to get people out into the waterfront and enjoying and like reclaiming and enjoying that space. And finally, we hold like a bunch of different working groups at GreenRoots that are within our members, that's within our membership. We help facilitate a neighborhood beautification group. We have a group that's active on the urban farm and our community gardens. We have a transit advisory group and a neighborhood wellness group that works on issues of health. And so all of these groups are really made up of Chelsea and East Boston residents who are just interested in supporting their communities and tackling issues of environmental justice.
Thank you. So I would say that in Codeman Square, last year we got a grant from Kresge Foundation, and just to work with climate change, climate justice. But we applied 3 CDCs. It was Dorchester Bay, Southwest CDC, and Codeman Square. So we covered a territory that encompassed Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, and Hyde Park. So we got this grant. This was a planning grant, and then last year also we got, or this year we got the implementation, the action grant. So this will be for 3 years. This grant. So we are going to continue working in the collaborative that we have with the other 2 CDCs, and the work that we are doing, or we did last year, was we identified some pieces of legislation. We identified 3 bills. The roadmap bill, that was one. Hero legislation, that was the second one. And the third one, the conservation corps, that is more like a workforce development. So under each one of these categories, we have we identify people that they are interested in each one of these bills. For instance, in the roadmap bill, we have people who are interested in working with food justice, and also people who are interested in open spaces, how to activate some parcels that were not active in the community. So that is one. The other piece, also we have another group of residents that they are interested in monitoring the air quality in the neighborhood, indoors and outdoors as well. So we are collecting data with like a fixed, like a monitors, air quality monitors, and also with mobile monitors outdoors. And we are collecting the data. We haven't decided exactly how we're going to use the data. We are kind of trying to formulate our questions, or what kind of questions we want to answer. But we are doing that. As a part of the implementation action grant, we hire the 3 CDCs hire a new coordinator for the 3 CDCs. It will be climate justice coordinator. And this person is hiring we're hiring also 2 organizers to do this work. So that these 3 new members that are adding to the team, we will be working the coming 3 years in different issues that we already identified in each CDC. And also, like you mentioned, amplifying and connecting and building leadership and building power, like a bottom up with other neighborhood associations and another community faith organizations that they are working on. So I think that it's going to be exciting. I feel a little hope because now when you know that you can build some power from the community and with the people and organize the people, and they are identifying their own issues and they are identifying their own resources. I think that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Thank you so much for sharing, and certainly hope is what we ought to abide in and rest in. I'm wondering, Priya, could you tell us more about your work and your thoughts on if we continue to rely on fossil fuels to power our homes, our cars, etc.?
Sure, thanks. I'm going to do this backwards and start with, what we can expect if we continue to rely on fossil fuels. This is less so like my thoughts and more so evidence-based, research and reasoning. But just recently, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I'm not familiar with that body, it is basically it's a body under United Nations that it doesn't do like its own kind of climate research, but it reviews all of the research that happens around the world and formulates basically a report on what is happening and what we can expect. And so just recently they released a report and, once again, they've warned us that an average global temperature rise over 1.5 degrees Celsius will be catastrophic in all regards, including public health. And as we mentioned, like we're already seeing these impacts of climate change, but if we can limit global warming by reducing and eliminating our reliance on dirty fossil fuels. Just a quick overview, but burning fossil fuels for energy to heat and cool our homes, to run our cars, to run public transportation, and all the other, things that we rely on fossil fuels for right now, releases chemicals that there are some pollutants that impact public health, and there are also greenhouse gases, which also impact public health, but they essentially create a greenhouse effect around the earth, which if you have ever been in a plant greenhouse, you'll know that it's like warmer in there because the gases basically around the earth trap heat. So that's like the very quick overview of how global warming and global climate change and greenhouse gases are all connected. Anyway, in case anyone wasn't familiar. Anyway, so if we reduce and eventually eliminate, here in Massachusetts, we do have a net zero mandate, which means that it is law in Massachusetts now that by mid-century, by 2050, we will have a net of 0 greenhouse gas emissions in the Commonwealth. And the hope is that if we do this, and if more communities around the world do this, we can limit global climate change to warming limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and hopefully avoid some of the more catastrophic impacts of climate change. So at Conservation Law Foundation, we're kind of addressing this in a variety of ways, both with litigation against some of the bigger oil and gas companies, and taking them to court, holding them accountable for their actions. We're also working on it from a policy and regulation side. So working on legislation such as the roadmap law, which is what set this net zero mandate, and working on decarbonizing our regional electric grid. So in particular, I do a lot of advocacy before the state, as well as work to green our electric grid by encouraging market mechanisms that allow renewable energy to be competitive in our energy markets, and helping to get dirty fossil fuel energy out of our energy markets, because ultimately, we do need to heat and cool our homes, so we need some kind of energy. We just want to make sure that it's clean, renewable energy. We're also working on greening all aspects of our lives here, so making sure that we can heat and cool our homes in a safe manner, using clean energy, as well as promoting legislation that will and policies that will help increase the number of electric cars on the road, because those don't create the same emissions that our traditional gas-powered cars do. Finally, we are working on establishing resiliency measures throughout the Commonwealth. So those would help to protect our most vulnerable communities, such as like the coastal communities, urban communities, which are really most significantly impacted by climate change hazards.
Could I ask Priya, what you're saying? This is some really exciting stuff. I'm sure it can feel sort of dry sometimes because it's so it's all tied into legal stuff, but it makes me think of some of the initiatives that Shavel'le, Danilo, and Sara were talking about, and particularly these initiatives that focus on educating the community, empowering the community to enable people to, in some cases, simply talk the talk, like learning the language in a way that helps people speak effectively in town halls, in public forums, in front of Senate or State House committees. Are there ways that Conservation Law Foundation can organize together with community groups like those that are joining us tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. We work very closely with actually like GreenRoots, Mattapan Food and Fitness, a whole host of other communities, community groups. I think, addressing climate change is one area where it can feel impossible to do it all. But the fortunate thing is there are many of us working in this arena, so to speak. And together, like the impact that we have together can be huge and much more than the impact that we have individually. It's really important to us to be able to work with partners because a lot of our partners, you know, especially our grassroots partners, have that like direct connection with communities, with the people who are directly impacted by climate change, you know, with the farmers, with the people who are in the ER, things like that. So we work closely with grassroots partners. We are very heavily focused on environmental justice and work with a lot of grassroots partners in addressing environmental justice considerations. And then we also work with other grass tops organizations like Sierra Club, NRDC, Environmental Defense Funds, on kind of like the more high level or like bird's eye view sorts of measures, like the big changes that need to happen at the same time that work is happening on the ground.
Yeah, and I was actually just going to jump in to say, obviously what you're doing on a sort of big level, engaging people is critically important, but I think it's worth, you know, us and those who are listening here, just remember that, you know, one way that we can all do something is expressing to our representatives that we care about this and that we're paying attention to these issues, and that when there are, you know, bills that are going to affect our quality of life, like how we transition and when we transition to renewable energy, contacting people. And I know it can be tricky sometimes just because, you know, it can take time, but some of it is as simple as if you can sort of be on a list from an advocacy organization and you know that some bill is coming to the state legislature, you know, you can just make a call or you can send an email. And I think if a lot more of us are doing that, it really does make a difference. It becomes clear to people that this is, you know, on everybody's radar and people care about this. And, you know, we're kind of fighting against the fact that the fossil fuel industry is lobbying the other side of this. So I think it's just critically important for us, you know, to try to weigh in. And one thing I just wanted to say is, you know, you're talking about the roadmap bill, but I know there's a push for something even beyond that, you know, the 100% renewable energy bill. And I don't know if you guys are also sort of working to push that forward or where that stands. I'm
not directly familiar, but would love to talk more offline.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks though. Yeah, definitely share with me because
maybe I can add something. I can add something is that I just want to say that is how important the work that CLF does is amazing, is great. This year we have been working with CLF all like last year and this year. They have been providing us technical assistance, and like you were mentioning before, I think that we tried to have meetings with the Mass Clean Energy Center because we wanted to influence the Workforce Development Program and that is going to be implemented with the $12 million there. You know, they will be happening every year. So I think that they help us to connect with them because we couldn't make it in like 2 months. So they help us to connect with them first thing. And then the second thing is that they help us with preparing, like you were saying, all the language before the meeting, prior to the meeting, right? So being on the same page, this is what it means and all of that. So all the details there. And the other thing that I can mention is also in the roadmap bill, we have a new definition of environmental justice, right? So all these details, CLF has been helping us to understand and translate what does that mean, this new definition of environmental justice, how we do that. So I think that just I want to see how the collaboration or the interaction and the connections and the interdependency that we have, all these people that we are here now talking, without, you know, we wouldn't be possible to do the work that we do without CLF. And CLF, you know, also needs kind of us, but because we build the power here in the front lines, you know.
And along those lines, I'm wondering, and perhaps others others are wondering, what do you see, and this is for anybody on the panel, really interested in hearing from the Mattapan perspective, the Chelsea perspective, and others' perspectives. What do you see as barriers? We know we have an E&J bill here in Massachusetts, or law, but what do you see as barriers for people to engage in climate action? What are you seeing in your communities as barriers?
Happy to jump in. I think a big barrier is just time and money. If people, I think when we're thinking about who the community in Chelsea and East Boston is, we're talking about frontline workers who are working in person every single day. We're talking about single parent household. We're talking about low income people who are out there working every day. They don't have the time to be calling their legislator at the end of a long workday and telling them that these are all the environmental justice issues that they are facing. And that's where the community organizations come in, because we can be flexible and find times to engage with those residents and then bring that language, bring those experiences back. But I do think just like people do not have time to be worried about this because it's not affecting, like they're not thinking about it right now when they're thinking about how do I pay my rent? How do I pay my bills? And I'm sure Shavel'le, you're about to say the same thing I am.
So definitely, and another thing on top of what Sarah said is maybe people just aren't familiar with those in power. They could come across as intimidating. So when they're in a room with that individual they never seen before, they don't know how that person's personality is like. It may make them not either come to the meeting because like, who are you? Or not even speak up because again, they don't have that terminology or what have you. So that intimidation for those who are in power and not knowing who they are.
Yeah. I mean, those, I think they're obviously those are critically important points, and there's all these competing demands. I think one thing maybe that we can do besides what you guys are already doing, which is great, but I think when people realize, and you know, how, I mean, people sort of worry about health. I think when people think about it in terms of their kids' health, it also starts to make more of a difference. And I think, you know, as much as people understand that, you know, kind of doing, you know, whatever, you know, and honestly, what some people may be doing is just talking to other people about it, because the more we talk about it, the more people understand it's a problem. And there's actually good evidence that when people you trust and you care about are worried about something, you start to take it more seriously. So, and I think even at that level, because we do know it's like the biggest children's, I mean, it's the biggest health problem, you know, overall, but we know that people who are kids right now, like little kids, this is, you know, their future is more, you know, asthma and heat-related illness and risks of extreme weather and insect-borne diseases. There's just a lot of stuff that, as you guys have pointed out, it's already here. And if we're not doing something, it's only going to be getting worse and worse and worse. And so, you know, I think just getting people thinking about that is a start.
Yes, so I'll go ahead, Danilo, please.
I just wanted to share a couple of things, maybe something similar about what Sarah was saying, and I'm assuming that it's similar for everybody. Like work schedules for people are very hard and challenging. I had some couple of cases where people, same thing, didn't come to pick up their AC units. And two of them, they told me they were coming directly from after working all night, taking care of some seniors. They came directly to pick up the AC units. So I think that is very hard because the demographics that we work, you know, they have changing schedules. They don't have sometimes like a fixed schedules. They are trying to get any job or anything, and they don't have power to negotiate schedules or anything like that. So that is one is the schedules. Another for me is the language. In Dorchester, the service area where Codeman Square, you know, the service that we have or we offer, there are 8 different languages are spoken. Out of these 8 languages, we are maybe able to offer 3 or maybe languages or 4 that we have in my organization, but still we have 4 or 5 other languages that we cannot support or help to engage people. And then the other, I would say, mention trust. I would say that, so the problem I think that with our organization is that we don't have enough time. So we always trying to do so many things at the same time. So in order to gain trust, you need to invest time. You need to invest time with people. So then you build the trust with the people. So, but then we don't have that much time, then we cannot build trust. Or because of COVID, there is this kind of disconnection and we cannot build trust that we used to do it before, right? So that is and the urgency that we have now is, it's like all the work that we are trying to do is very urgent and we have to do it. So we just move to the next thing, So it's very challenging to engage people because they are, under pressure. We are under pressure. It's like we are kind of not stopping. We are all of us in very crazy lives.
That is so true. I want to pivot for a second. We have a question in the chat. And Mary, where are you, Mary? Mary had a question, and she put it in the chat, but I told Mary I was going to call her. Oh, hey, Mary. Okay, please ask your question.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep it simple. So I've been working on educating the public about single-use plastic and health and climate change all connecting. And with the temperatures rising, so many people drink single-use water and it's cheap. And so as the temperatures rise, it's ingested and the chemicals are leached into the water. That's another health aspect. People are being poisoned that way. But how do we help people avoid that? And if I could give everyone a reusable water bottle to protect them and the environment, I would, but that's obviously not a thing. I can't afford it. So how do we protect them? How do we educate them? If they have to be hydrated. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I mean, obviously, once one has, I understand there's an upfront cost to a reusable water bottle, and I actually wish you could just give them out. But obviously in the long run, it's much cheaper to fill that bottle with tap water, presuming we are not running into water quality problems, okay, and our taps are okay, which is really important. But if our water quality is good, it is much better just to drink tap water. Obviously, the bottled water we buy, there's nothing particularly good about it. And once you buy a few plastic bottles, that certainly adds up in costs. So, but I think you're right. I mean, I think it's plastic bottles in general that we have to be, figuring out how not to have them be so ubiquitous. So in work settings and such, like I know at our work conferences, for example, we were moving to just do away with them and have a water cooler. And that, that's obviously a better way to go, but I don't have a great plan for how we could get people to switch, but clearly in the long run, it's cheaper to fill them up with tap water and not use plastic bottles that we throw away.
Yeah, I definitely think that education is a huge barrier to this issue. Just thinking from like personal experience, over the last week, I was with some friends and had multiple people ask, is the tap water okay to drink? And I mean, mind you, you're in Providence, Rhode Island, water quality issues are real, but for the most part,
it's okay to drink Providence water.
Right.
Yeah.
And just the fact that it was a question kind of raised red flags to me, the fact that they didn't know that, generally speaking, tap water is fine, and there's nothing in bottled water that makes it better for you than tap water, which I think a lot of people think is the case, which was kind of mind-blowing to me. But yeah, and I also think that a issue that has come up to me that I hadn't realized was that people are very unaware of the fact that people think that they can just drink their bottled water out of their disposable bottle from the grocery store or the gas station or wherever. And if they recycle it, it's fine because it's going to get recycled. But they're unaware that the amount of municipal recycling that actually goes through and gets recycled is way, way less than any of us really would hope or anticipate, and that our municipal recycling systems are just like super overburdened. And because the, you know, countries abroad that we had been shipping our recycling to have started to refuse our recycling, a lot of the stuff that you put in your recycling bin on your curbside is not getting recycled. It's just going to landfill. So people, I think, are unaware of that. They think
people are not aware. You're absolutely right. A lot of it has to do with marketing and the political power, again, of the fossil fuel industry, which is the industry that provides the raw material for plastics. We face a real uphill battle. I agree with you. I think, you know, as a psychiatrist, I look at communication and how messaging affects people's emotions and behavior. And I'm afraid that that industry has done a really masterful job of sort of teaching, miseducating an entire generation or more about just those things that you mentioned, Priya. The fact that, yes, of course, that one of the huge injustices is inequities in water quality, but at the same time, a totally separate issue is the fact that many municipal areas like ours, fortunately, you can drink the water. The water is as healthy or healthier than the privatized water that you drink in in one-way plastics. I just wanted to ask if anybody has any thoughts about a potential relationship with legal action that was taken against plastic bags, at least in some parts of Massachusetts. Some communities have pretty successfully moved away from plastic, you know, grocery bags, at least begun to do that. Arguably, the behavioral technique that they're using, I don't know how socially just it is. It's essentially penalizing people by charging you extra for a plastic bag, rather than rewarding people for using recycled bags or reusable bags. But does anybody have any sense or any examples of similar legislation that could be used to reduce the use of plastic bottles, or, you know, because I think that something like, I was struck just over the past couple of years by how quickly people were able to move away from plastic bags, which are a pestilence, right, in many communities. And I just wonder whether there's an opportunity for something similar to that for plastic bottles.
Yeah, I can jump in, but I can only give a high level overview because I am strictly in the Clean Energy and Climate Change program at CLF, but we do also have a program that deals with zero waste. And I know that our zero waste folks are working on a plastic bottle like bill, basically, and the very high level gist of what this entails is, as I understand it, it would like increase the fee, like when you buy cans and bottles in Massachusetts, right? There's a like 5 cents or something like that fee that gets returned to you if you bring the cans and bottles back to be recycled at the store. And this would relate to that in some way and hope to like increase the number of people who are actually bringing back. There's also, you know, like there's stigma around that. Like, for example, for my family, you know, being people of color, being immigrants, there's this like stigma of like, oh, well, only people who really need money collect cans and bottles to recycle at the grocery store. So I think it's important to like eliminate that kind of a consideration as well, so that people don't feel like, oh, well, I you know, if my neighbor or my friend sees me at Trader Joe's recycling my cans and bottles, they're gonna think like I'm down on my luck because I need these 5 cents from these cans and bottles. It's not about that. It's about, you know, protecting our resources, limiting the amount of product that goes into landfills, limiting the amount of raw materials that we're needing to extract, because it's right, both the aluminum that goes into making cans, the plastic that goes into making bottles, we're extracting these from the earth. And so it's, you know, it touches on a variety of subjects, but very high level, and hopefully I did that like some semblance of justice, because I know that our folks here at CLF are working really hard on that. And I would encourage you to, you know, take a look at CLF's website and blog for more information on that, since I can't really speak to much more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have another question in the chat related to, could we give an idea of what items comprise of an emergency kit for heat, winter, and flood? Well, so for heat, we have what Crew distributes is a kit with electrolytes, water, cohesive wrap, a thermometer, to be able to fight off heat exhaustion and heat strokes if one has to go out in an extreme hot day. For the winter flood conditions, that backpack contains a first aid kit, a can opener, a waterproof bag or waterproof seal to put important documents in. We mentioned a can opener, waterproof matches, a stress ball, because I don't know how many of y'all know that being stuck in a house in a flood is stressful for some, maybe for all. So a stress ball is able to help alleviate stress for those who are tactical learners, or those who are more tactical rather. So those are just some of the items that are in a heat kit and also a flood kit. I'm curious to know from all the different organizations here and so much outstanding work that is being done, how can people get involved? How can people get involved in your organization locally and from far away? Certainly we have folks on the call from different parts of the country. And, you know, how can people that are listening become more engaged in the efforts to transition away from fossil fuels and become more climate resilient? So that's a two-part question. So, and please, if you have any other questions, please put it in the chat. But the first question is, and we can go around to each person, how can people get involved in your organization locally or from far away? Let's start off with GreenRoots, and then we can just go along the line. So we can start off with Sarah.
Sure, thank you. And thanks for asking this question. I think the best way to support us would probably be to join our mailing list. You can do that through our website, and you can hear about any calls to action we have, like whether signing on to a petition or attending any rallies or things like that. I would also ask you all to like our Facebook page and follow our Instagram and TikTok, which I'm very excited about our TikTok. And you can search up GreenRoots Chelsea on any of those platforms and find us there. You can always donate on our website. And although our work is like very hyper local to Chelsea and East Boston, if you ever happen to be in these neighborhoods and are around, we'd love to have any of you and all of you at our events and meetings.
Perhaps Danilo.
I just put some information on the chat so people can see that there is in the bottom of the main page of the landing page of CSNDC. In the bottom of the page there is contact information. If you want to reach out to us via email or via phone, you can do that. And I also place my email address there, so feel free to reach out, danilo@csndc.com. Yeah, and like Sarah said, we have social media, Facebook, Instagram. Feel free to reach out in that way as well.
I would say same as Sarah and Danilo has said, putting all that information in the chat for you. And same as Sarah, if you all are ever in Mattapan, we'd love to give you all a tour of some of the green spaces that we have.
Awesome.
And also to interject, as people will continue, for those who are registered, we will send the the panelists contact information via email. So we will share it when we send up a follow-up email in the next day or two. So you will have an opportunity to also have this information. So we will. So yes, please continue to for those who haven't shared, to share with us how can folks support you locally and from far away?
I think I am the last of the community organizations to answer, but same as others, follow us on social media, on Twitter, like and retweet our posts, share our Instagram posts with your friends and your family members, read our blog, join as a member, of course, is a great way to help us and to help us make sure that we can continue to do this work. So like I said, CLF is a member-supported advocacy organization. So it's really important to us to have people involved. And then I wanted to add from earlier, something I was going to mention in terms of like how people can get involved. We talked about this earlier, how there are some barriers to people being able to participate in advocacy, especially before the state and local governments. I've actually served on a municipal board in my community for like 5 or 6 years now, and it's very obvious the barriers that people face because if you're a person with little kids, or if you're working 2 jobs or something like that, you're not going to have the time to attend public meetings, especially if they're during the workday or like the traditional workday. But even if they're at night, if you have to like let your babysitter go home or make your kid dinner or like supervise homework or something like that, it's really difficult to engage with public officials. But we at CLF are working to try to help alleviate some of those barriers. We, especially before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and the Energy Facility Siting Board, which are integral to making sure that we move off of fossil fuels and are able to go about our lives, heating and cooling our homes, using transportation, et cetera, in a sustainable manner with clean energy. But if you see a post, if you see a notification, a legal notice, anything like that, if you can, your engagement it really is important in those settings. Hopefully the things that we're working on are effective and allow for increased engagement, also around language and people's economic ability to participate in public process is really important. But in terms of getting involved with CLF, definitely check out our website, check out our blogs if you're feeling like you want more information, and find us on social media as well.
Dr. Jim, Dr. Caren, how can folks get involved? And we do
Sure.
have a question in the chat.
Yeah, we have a Twitter handle at Climate Code Blue, all one word. And you can check out our website. And if we can be useful to your organizations, one way we try to serve is by providing information about the connections between fossil fuel driven climate change and health and mental health. So we're happy to come and talk. We're happy we're looking for community groups like the ones that are here tonight that we can learn from and use our privilege to amplify the voices of. Thanks.
Don't know if Dr. Caren wanted to add anything to
I would just
that.
say, nicely put, Jim. And I would just add, yeah, that we've been involved a little bit. I know with again, weighing in on health consequences of some of the sort of bad things that are happening in communities. So the Eversource issue, in Chelsea, and the peaker plant, elsewhere. So there's a lot of, sort of fossil fuel related infrastructure that, as you all know, is being placed in communities that already have high rates of chronic diseases, where it doesn't belong anywhere, and then it's being sort of pushed off in places where people are already disadvantaged. So we've really tried to be available, and I would sort of add this to kind of weigh in on writing to again, elected officials or government agencies and such, just to point out the health dangers of these beyond the other sort of inequities of placing some of these pieces of infrastructure where they are being placed.
Well, thank you for that. I'll be remiss if we didn't shout out the office of Boston City Councilor Julia Mejia is here. We want to thank you for the office for being here. And actually, Sandra, who is representing that office, actually has a question that I think is fitting, because we know that politics is interconnected to climate change. So Sandra, could I call on you to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I would turn on my camera, but I'm in the dark and I don't have time. So just to make the most out of our time together, thank you so much, everybody, for everything that you've mentioned. I'm taking notes and I'm going to share with our office. My question is, what can elected officials do in the short term and also in the long term? We have such a wealth of information here from community leaders that I just love to hear from you guys directly how you envision elected officials in participating in partnership alongside you guys and the community more broadly. Any tips would be extremely helpful, again, in the short term and perhaps long term. Thank you very much. And again, my name is Sandra. Always email us. I'm going to put Julia's email in the chat. We are here to listen.
So I'll say you did the first thing, which is coming here to a panel like this. That's the most important thing that you can do to learn about other community organizations that are doing this work. And then the second thing is continue to uplift the community-based organizations that are actually on the ground doing the work. So whether it's getting more of your constituents to attend the events that the community-based organizations are leading, or is it helping them to connecting them with those in power when we talk about bills and legislature, connecting our residents to those that that are empowered to make those policy changes.
Yeah, and just building off of that, Shavel'le, I just want to touch on a point you made earlier about like even knowing who the legislators are or who the city councilors are is like really important to community members, and like is that first step in like building the trust in terms of like getting them to testify at a hearing or getting them to sign on to some petition about this bill or something like that. So like building that trust with like directly with residents is important.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think the fact that a person is elected kind of represents a trust, right, that the constituents, that the community has put in that person. So it's important to act as a bridge between the community, the people who have said, we need you to represent our interests, and do that, like work with community groups, and also, be there to put pressure on legislators, on state representatives and state officials so that it can be easy to get like comfortable or I guess at like the bird's eye view level, and it's important from time to time, or very often, to kind of pull people down into the community and say like, this is what our people need and this is what our people want, and we are relying on you to make that happen.
I maybe only one or two things to add. It would be one thing I think that is that I like to see collaboration between city officials. So between anyone who kind of are next to any other district, something like that. So I think that when the leadership show us collaboration, I think that that is a big example for us as community-based organizations, that also we should or we must collaborate. Usually we do that, but I think that that is always like a very good example to see that collaboration among the leadership. And if you need any, if city officials need any feedback around any local issues, they are welcome to come to, to knock out doors and to talk to us, and we'll be more than happy to, share any knowledge or any information that we may have. Yeah, just that.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, thank you for sharing those tips. Is there any other final word? As we come to the conclusion of this program, we want to thank you all for being here, for the many different organizations represented and doing a fantastic job in sharing with us the work that you do. And we are so appreciative of it. We're hippopotamus glad about it, in fact, because we do need to, we need organizations on the ground doing this great work. Just wanted to open the floor, and you can all go if you like, to share any final thoughts that you may have with the social media audience, with the audience that's here, the audience that will see this on YouTube later on. Yeah, so if you have any final thoughts you'd like to share, please do say so, and then we can close the program out.
I can start. I think something Priya was saying earlier really resonated with me about like how it is hard. This like fight against climate injustice and environmental injustice is like huge and can be daunting and is really hard, but there are so many wonderful people who are working on it. And I think like just being in a group like this, or like seeing how many people are in the audience or are watching this on social media and like really care, like it just gives me so much hope. And I know that like, yeah, being in spaces like this just makes me feel so much hope for our future. And I hope that it can be that space for everyone who's in the audience too.
Yeah, I'm gonna just echo what you said, because I think sometimes in talking about this, there's so much really worrisome about it and scary and very overwhelming. And I think exactly just kind of remembering that there are things that we can do, and sort of the power of community, I think are kind of critical pieces.
I think that for me, I would say that all this work that we are doing, I think that is really important around changing our whole society, going from fossil fuels into like a clean energies or renewables. So I think that even though I understand that there is some work that we have to do kind of at the individual level, I would say that my message would be that we also we should use the word we more, because we are the ones who build the power, and we the neighborhood, we the neighbors, or we the city, we the country, we are the ones who are going to be able to change this. So even though we have things that we can do at the individual level, we shouldn't forget about the we, that we are going to do it together. That's we. Yeah.
Definitely, and I would share that it definitely takes different people to make climate change work. So we need individuals like you on the call or on the Zoom right now who really care about it, and then going up to our community-based organizations that are more that are connected and can raise those voices if you don't have the time to our policy, to our government and our local policy, to our elected officials. We need all 3 or 4 groups of people to make systematic change when it comes to changing and reversing climate change, the negative impacts of climate change.
Yeah, definitely agree with all that's been said. And, you know, the reports, the things that we see on the news, wildfires, increased storms, public health impacts, it is scary. It's terrifying. The world's on fire, sometimes literally. But we've made huge strides, you know, like the roadmap law, for example, is huge. And climate change is something that, you know, regrettably, we have known about for a long time. And it even to this day, unfortunately, there are folks who deny that it's happening or think that we don't need to do anything about it. But luckily, there are more people who understand that it's a big issue. It's now kind of a household sort of issue. People are talking about it, and the more people that are talking about it, the more people who understand it, you know, the more likely we are to get these like sweeping legislative changes, these sweeping changes to our systems and our infrastructure to pass through and really be meaningful. And I think it's really uplifting and gives me a lot of hope that we have been able to get some of this legislation passed, and that, you know, utilities are kind of starting to see the writing on the wall and see that, you know, they need to start thinking about how they need to change in order to, you know, continue to have a business once we move away from dirty fossil fuels.
All right, that sounds smooth and cool. All right, well, again, thank you for a wonderful event tonight, but we're not done. We will have a week, and we have an event about trees tomorrow and how trees can help mitigate the climate crisis. So we're not done, y'all. We've only just begun. And thank you all for outstanding work, and we're looking forward to staying in touch, and have a wonderful, reassuring, rested evening. And we'll see you out on the battlefield.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, have a good night.